Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, EMA Workload Automation Radar, a review of top workload automation tools. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Dan Twing, President and COO at Enterprise Management Associates. Dan has over 25 years of experience in information systems, software development, and technology outsourcing. Dan focuses on all aspects of intelligent and automated management of IT. And before I hand things over to Dan, I wanted today's audience to know that today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback as well as some additional resources, including how you access this new report. Also, Dan will be dedicating the last few moments to answering your questions. You can log them anytime using the Q&A panel. And now I'd like to go ahead and pass things over to our featured speaker, Dan Twing. Dan?
Thanks, Raleigh. Well, today I'm going to walk through the results of our radar process for the subject of workload automation. So I'm going to start with some of the overarching trends that have sort of impacted the marketplace and advised some tweaks to our scoring model. Then we'll look at a little bit deeper dive into the methodology that we use for the report and for the research. Look at some characteristics of a preferred solution. And then we'll talk about the actual results that we got by looking at the vendors in the marketplace, look at some of the special recognition awards, and some of the future trends that we're seeing in the market. So that looking at how the market has changed, part of the methodology of the radar process includes interviewing end users. So I probably spoke to 30 or 32 end user organizations that are using different products that are covered in this report. And some of these trends are things that I was aware of, and some of these are things that I sort of really were highlighted for me in the course of interviewing all of these different folks that are actually using products. And one of the first things that really jumped out for me this time compared to when we last did this in 2015 was that more users are upgrading more often, and they're closer to the most current release in products. And what I've seen is that most of the products have improved their upgrade processes over the past several releases. So they've done things like minimizing downtime for upgrades, lowering the impact of upgrading, and in some cases allowing for several versions of agents to coexist. Many of the products have gone to more full-featured web-based consoles, which is much easier for a global organization to update than if you're on a fat client. So there's just been a lot of things that have sort of eased the pain of upgrading. And for those organizations who have sort of crossed over and got onto the versions of whatever product they're using that sort of have these newer upgrade capabilities, behind them in the rearview mirror, once you go through that sort of last painful upgrade, the process for most of these products has gotten a lot easier. And as a result, organizations that have made that jump, they tend to then stay more current thereafter. The process is easier, and so they tend to be on the more current release. And also, what's driving them to want to be there is that there's a lot of features that are supporting things like digitalization, continuous delivery, and DevOps, things that they really want. So they're sort of forced to go through that one big painful upgrade. They get on the newer release, and then it's much easier to stay current, and as a result, more and more are. So it was common to talk to people who were 2 and 3 major releases behind, and now they're talking about being a point release or 2 behind what's current. So that's a pretty important trend, because in this marketplace previously there was a lot of lag. A lot of folks really were hesitant to make major upgrades. Another trend is expanded APIs. And this has been ongoing for some time, but it continues. So we see a lot of inbound features that really support most of the GUI functions and open up opportunities to change the way jobs are defined. You'll hear the term jobs as code. A lot of the developers are more involved with, in some organizations, with the scheduling tool itself and being able to define things through their text editor in line with the business logic. It really improves that sort of DevOps relationship. And yet, once it's ingested by the tool, the scheduling team can still maintain an overview of all the jobs and schedules, and they can use that familiar UI to do what they need to do to balance the workloads across the entire organization, while individual developers can use a tool that's familiar for them. And the power of these APIs has been increasing to do things to integrate with business applications, to empower users in ways that they really weren't before. So the whole concept of web services in these tools is really changing and broadening their capability well beyond a handful of operators who are involved in scheduling. Another major trend has been to natively have managed file transfer capabilities and very sophisticated managed file transfer capabilities. WLA tools have long been integrated with a variety of other third-party sort of file transfer products and managed file transfer products. But with the rise of big data, there's a lot more file handling, data handling, and these products have started to incorporate these capabilities more natively and really enhance them. Another trend is the rise of enterprise licenses. Many of these products use different kinds of mechanisms, numbers of agents, numbers of jobs, numbers of servers, to sort of, determine licensing costs. But the more successful the adoption of enterprise WLA across the organization, and with things like DevOps initiatives, and there's more agents being deployed, there's more users, more seats, if that's the mechanism. A lot of organizations have started to look more at enterprise licenses so that they can fully use the product, spread it out broader across the organization, and get those benefits. And another specific thing is that where they're supporting containers or containerized applications, while containers themselves don't each get an agent, containerized environments tend to have more VMs. There's an overall increase in the number of agents that are deployed, and this can cause a big increase in licensing fees depending on what the cost drivers are and existing licenses. So some of the WLA vendors that have added container support have really had to consider changing or adding additional ways to license to their licensing schemes in order to accommodate these structural differences in agent deployments as organizations start to make greater use of containers. So as an end user organization, you really ought to consider how you're using it and reevaluate your license. A lot of your peers have already done that, and in many cases the vendors have been proactive to address that in the case of microservices type environments. And there's also a rising use of self-service dashboards. Now they've been around for a while. I did some research back in 2016 where while we see that the uptake of this increasing, about 17% of organizations have sort of tried it, didn't get any uptake on the end user side, and they just pulled it back and quit trying. Those that have been successful have told me that they really have to market those services to the business users to get the value proposition understood. Those that have sort of made that a priority have benefited. So we see about 54% of organizations were offering self-service in that 2016 timeframe, with 16% planning to increase over the next 12 months. And so in my interviews, I've also talked to a lot more people who, rather than having a handful of stakeholders really experimenting with this, those that have had success with it have had very great success. It's reduced the number of calls. It keeps the operators sort of out of a lot of mundane and unnecessary tasks. So if you can get the organization to uptake it and you put the effort in, there is a benefit there. And more organizations seem to be going down that path. And the vendors have continued to sort of improve those capabilities as well. We've also seen, since our 2015 report, an increase in the support for big data tools. So there was relatively good support in 2015, but as the Hadoop ecosystem has changed and there's a lot of new tools in the market, there's been increased integration and support for those tools within the WLA vendor community, and the tools are now supporting many of those new capabilities and really supporting it more natively. And really a much broader trend that I've seen is that WLA is really becoming a digital business automation tool. Those organizations that are going through digitalization process, they're pulling in, relying on, and using their workload tool in a lot of those processes. So it's sort of being pulled across to the business side. There was one organization in particular I talked to. They were in the financial services outsourcing space. So they hosted applications for credit unions. And, of course, in their back office, they were using a scheduling tool to manage all of their internal processes. They really had no services specifically directed to this one problem that one of their customers or prospective customers had brought up, which is we have this online process where we order debit cards and credit cards, and we have to move data from there to another outside vendor, and it was just sort of a step in the process. It really had nothing to do with what this vendor was providing, and yet they were able to take their WLA tool and take over that task, which was completely outside of their normal services, and it helped them win the deal and it helped them make this customer happy. And so what you see is, you have great calendaring, great event processing in these workload tools, and they're no longer really just thought of in many organizations as something that a group of people in operations uses. It has broader utility, and it's starting to be pulled in that way. And finally, I think all of these trends are leading to what I would call increased investment and really increased competition in the WLA market. We've seen a number of relatively new vendors in the space that I'll cover later. We've seen things like IBM partnering with HCL to further their workload tool. CA acquired Atomic in the last 18 months. You see Cisco sold the title product to a private group. I'll cover that a little bit more later. But there's a lot of activity in what had been, if you look back 5 years, a relatively mature, relatively stable, kind of sleepy market for a tool that had been around a long, long time. The average product in this market has existed for 20 plus years, and yet in the last 4 or 5 years, it seems like there's been a real increase in the competition and the view of this market, driven by a lot of these trends and others. So with that, I'm going to quickly run through kind of the radar process, but all of those trends were sort of updated and incorporated into the scoring model. So for the radar, we really standardize the evaluation of product sets, and we do these reports across a number of different products, including workload automation. And we look at 5 key areas: architecture and integration, functionality, deployment and administration. Cost advantage is one of the more difficult ones to assess. We're really looking at the licensing options, the flexibility, and then the cost of a number of different scenarios is the best way we can measure that. And then we look at the characteristics around the vendor, which is not restricted just to, how big is their market share or how big is the company, but we're looking at their activities in this market. So sometimes a relatively large company, take Cisco, for example, who, for them, the title product really never seemed to be as important as it should have been. Even though they're a very large, financially stable company, they weren't doing the R&D, and they weren't maybe as big a player in this space as some others. And as a result, they've decided to divest the product, and now there's a different group for whom that's going to be very important. So they may be smaller, but if they're doing more R&D, the vendor strength score could actually go up. So that's one way to look at that. It's really their activities in this particular market. So under architecture, we're looking at things like the business focus of the software. I mean, this is specific now to WLA. Things around scalability, performance, reliability, how they handle dynamic workload placement and support cloud placement of workloads, things like that. And then we look at things like, how are they supporting SLA-driven thresholds. Breadth of platform support is really just the operating systems and environments that are supported. The big cut in this market is, there's traditionally mainframe that added distributed systems, and how well did they bring those two together, versus other products that came later and don't support mainframes and just support distributed systems. So that's where this one comes into play. The breadth of the application and database support, so how many integrations do they have and how well do they support those. And then disaster protection, things like fault tolerance, high availability, failover, and so forth. So this report, we first did it in 2009, and so we've been building this scoring model and adapting it for each version of this report. The current version in 2017 is the fourth time that we've published this report. So some of these measurements have been used and been around for a long time. As they become less of a differentiator in the market, we might lower the weight of some of those characteristics in favor of some of the newer trends, which are weighted more heavily. Because some of these characteristics are pretty standard across all of the products. Others there's more sporadic support, and you get a wider array of scoring in the model. And where that happens, we try to give more weight because there's real differentiation between the products. So the integration and interoperability part of architecture and integration has to do more with how comprehensive are those APIs and that web services support? How are they integrated in supporting clouds? And then how are they integrated to some of the more core IT functions, to CMDB integration, other IT process automation type tools, integration with capacity management, and as I talked earlier, integration with managed file transfer. However, now we're seeing more native support there and less integration. But overall, how are they playing well with other tools in your environment? Functionality starts with features, and this is very specific to each market that we cover. In the case of workload automation, we're looking at things like the ability to end-to-end monitoring of jobs, the compliance management. Can they do different kinds of event triggering? How sophisticated is that? What's the capabilities that they expose through self-service portals? Forecasting and analytics and reporting is a very large category. It's probably on this list, it's the one that has the most varied things that can impact that score, where some of these is, they're a little more, a shorter list. Alerting capabilities, security capabilities. One area that's really, I think, going to expand in the future are these what-if scenarios. As we see more AI and machine learning come into the process, and as you're integrated with a broader array of the infrastructure tools, it really increases the ability to play what-if scenarios as new jobs are brought in. And this is one area that I think we'll see more improvement, but there's quite a bit of variability across the products on this characteristic. And the other side of functionality is ease of use. So we look at things like just the simplicity of the GUI, and in some cases now we're seeing more of these full-featured web tools. So how do they play into the mix? Integration with SLA and policy awareness, root cause analysis. Mobile device support is an interesting one because, in some ways there's not a lot you're going to do to define a new job, or really interact with the tool a whole lot from a mobile device. But some of the alerting, some of the characteristics can be very helpful. So some tools have limited their mobile device support to very specific things. Others, you can do a lot of things through that tool. It's a matter of whether you choose to. And then as we look at deployment and administration, and for me this is a big part of the Radar process, which is really trying to get at the heart beyond just what does the tool do, but how do you have to work to use the tool. So how easy is it to deploy? How much time does it take? Are there conversion facilities if you're switching to a new tool? Things like job discovery, import capabilities, what's it like to get staff trained? And really that support and services that you get back from the vendor. And then the other, and in this year I actually increased the weight of the ease of administration aspects and reduced the weight a bit of the ease of deployment, because the deployment's a one-time thing. Ease of administration, I mean, you're going to be living with this tool for a long time. Many of these tools have been in place in a customer site, 15, 18 years, the same tool. And while there's been a lot of vendors have seen, switching behavior between clients, and the research has shown a lot of folks, more than half the market, have thought about changing tools. Many take a look around and they don't change. So you're going to be living with that tool for a long time. And so we try to measure that sort of ease of maintaining the tool, keeping it well-tuned, and really how well does it automate your management of the environment. And then we look at the cost characteristics, as I said earlier, which can be a bit of a challenge. We look at the flexibility of the licensing model, and then we have several scenarios priced out. I'll hit on those quickly. And I already talked about how the vendor strength characteristic is looked at, but we try to look at things like the strength of their vision and strategy, where they're heading with it, and really heavily weight that idea of R&D and how much are they moving the tool forward. So when we go through the process, we develop a list of critical features and capabilities, and then we try to identify all of the candidates in the market. There's some new ones this time. The vendors actually go through a questionnaire that has more than 150 points of comparison, and then we have a model that scores and weights those responses. But before we input them, we go through a process with the vendors where we do demos and other ways to sort of vet their responses and make sure that we've seen the product do some of these characteristics, and then we do the customer interviews and talk to real end users. And through all of that, then we sort of combine what we found and we score those results. In order for a feature to be eligible in this analysis, it requires these three things: that it's generally available in a GA release, that it's self-contained within the package, or if it's an optional add-on when we price out the scenarios, then it needs to be incorporated into that pricing. And really that it's a fully documented capability in publicly verifiable sources. So for the pricing, I'm just going to hit these very quickly, but the first scenario includes 250 endpoints. There's a mainframe environment, connectors for SAP. I mean, you can see this is a fairly large enterprise type scenario. The second scenario is 300 overall deployed tasks. It's more of a distributed environment with a DR license and so on. And then the final two scenarios are variations on those themes. And so we ask them to price each of these out so that we can kind of get a sense. Obviously, none of these are going to look just like any particular end user organization, but we're trying to look at what might look like some of the potential users of the product, just to try to compare how the products, that sort of total cost of acquiring the product. Of course, this is the chart everybody wants to get to, which is where do all of these fall out? So I'm going to walk through kind of quickly some of the changes from 2015. So the first big change is that there's two new vendors in the mix here. You'll see Infinite Data. This is a product that is a company based in Poland. They started about 5 years ago. The product started to become available. The company was actually formed a little earlier than that. And you'll see Arvado Systems, which is another interesting tool in the marketplace that we found. This one is based in Germany. And so we wanted to add some of these new players because there's been some other consolidation in the market. Of course, if you look at the 2015 report, you would have seen CA listed separately from Atomic because they were two independent companies. CA acquired Atomic, and for this report, we only looked at the CA Atomic Workload Automation tool and didn't evaluate the other pre-existing products in the CA portfolio, although those are all continued to be supported and offered. I mentioned earlier how IBM had sort of partnered with HCL with their product, so there's another change. And then, of course, the Cisco product, which was still at the time of this report was Cisco, is now Tidal, and as an independent company, and that was acquired by STA Group. They're a portfolio company of Chicago-based Dillon Kane, and they acquired Tidal on November 16th. So that's a relatively new event in the market, right as I was finalizing this report. So we'll go through some of the categories here. If you remember, if you've seen this report before, we have these colored bands which represent the different categories. So the way that this report is really laid out and the way to read it, the vertical axis is a combination of the features and the architecture and integration. So it's really, what are you getting from the product? The horizontal axis is a combination of those costing, licensing, and different ways to acquire the product rights, characteristics of the cost advantage category, along with all of that deployment and ease of use and ease of administration type characteristics. So the way I look at this chart is that the horizontal axis is what you have to give up to get the features represented in the vertical axis. So it's that intersection, and then the size of the dot is representing those vendor strength characteristics that we talked about. So it isn't really the kind of report where you want to be in that far upper right corner. You want, as a tool, it really is a reflection of how much features you've included and what the costs and effort to use the product are, sort of balance that out. That's why these bands run they run diagonally for that reason. And so you'll see that it's that mix that pushes a product out into that far upper right band And it's a balance. And being in the upper right corner or the lower right corner of that just represents different aspects about how a product comes to market. And so from a user perspective, when you're looking at this report, you really need to consider, do you need all of the features in the marketplace? It's that balance. And there's really no one right answer for any organization. You have to look at your priorities. This is sort of a starting place. And we hope that we help you, find these clusters of products that are in that area of the chart that fits your needs, and it'll sort of help you start looking at a group of products. So when we look at that chart, the targeted value area is a product called Arcana. Arcana is a Windows-only product, so it has a very specific use. It's a very full-featured product. It does a lot of things for a lot of end users, but it's very targeted to just that Windows environment. So that's why it's on the chart where it is. That next band up is what we call strong value, and there's quite a range there, obviously, of products that are more fully featured, but maybe there's more cost or more effort involved to deploy them, or they're less featured and they have more ease characteristics. The products in that category included Arvado Systems, Title, Flux, Infinite Data, SMA Solutions, and Vinzan. And then that upper right category we talked about, the value leaders included ASCI with their Active Batch product, BMC with their Control M, CA with the Atomic product, Help Systems, IBM with their IBM Workload Automation, MVP Systems, and Stone Branch are all in that category. And these, as you can see, are in alphabetical order, although title's out of order because of the name change there recently. But there's no indication here by order of which one did better than the other exactly. I'm just listing them in alphabetical order. Again, I'll back up real quick. When you look at the chart, those value leaders are in that upper right category, and again, it's a balancing act, and you decide which one is most suited to your needs. In the report this year, I also included a category that I titled WLA Enrichment Products. So in this category, there are two big groupings here. The first is those products that are offering additional analytics and predictive analytics capabilities and additional reporting capabilities around the workload tools. So back in 2012, when we did the second version of this report, Terma software was actually included at that time for these reasons, and at the time was the only one that we were aware of that was sort of in that space. And since 2012, Terma has added, well, for one thing, you may have known the product as JAWS if you're a user of that product. It was integrated with a number of different workload tools in the market, several of the CA tools, with the Title tool while it was still Cisco at the time, and other products had sort of worked with Terma to augment their reporting. The JAWS product was renamed Terma Unify, and they've added Terma Analytics, Terma Insight, and Terma Vision to the portfolio. So there's a number of ways to enhance and better look at your workload environment through this analytical lens. Now, Terma has some company in the marketplace now. Digitate is the first one that I became aware of that was new in this space. And Digitate was founded in 2015. It's actually a Tata Consultancy Services venture. They have offices in Santa Clara and in Pune, India. And in the 2016 workload report, we talked about the cognitive type capabilities, AI, machine learning capabilities would be coming to the workload market. And Digitate, as far as I'm aware, is the first to do that. The Digitate product is a broader IT operations tool using AI and machine learning. And they offer the product for IT operations generally, but they specifically have a version of the product, and the product is called Ignio, and they have a version of that they call Ignio for Batch, which is playing that role of predictive analytics and reporting capabilities, but with a machine learning and AI engine behind it. SMA Solutions also, they're the makers of Opcon. They also have created an analytics product that uses AI called Acern. It's deeply integrated with the Opcon product, but it can be used with a number of workload products as well, and that's a slightly newer entrant to this same space. So we included those in the report, and then we also included Beta Systems and their Beta 92 EJM product. And this is sort of an overlay for mainframe schedulers that adds an independent agent network for distributed systems. So many of the products that started in the mainframe space added distributed systems capabilities, but early on that was a relatively slow thing to happen. Going back 8-10 years, it was happening. In some cases, they were almost like two separate products. The integration has gotten better over time. Well, separately from what the individual WLA tool makers were doing, Beta Systems created their own capability for these distributed systems agents and incorporated them all under the umbrella of that mainframe environment. They have recently created an HTML5 interface as well, and they have some of their own predictive analytics and reporting capabilities. So it's another way to enhance and augment if you're a very heavy mainframe environment, but you need to oversee jobs in distributed environments as well. So these enrichment products are also covered in the report. Now, in addition to scoring the products and displaying them on that radar chart that we covered earlier, we also look at special recognition in certain areas. So sometimes the tool, our measurement tool, it's blending and averaging and weighting out all of these characteristics. But oftentimes there are very specific things that are worth calling out, and that's what we try to do here. And so in the 2017 report, I've included 6 of these. The first is for Arvado Systems, which I mentioned earlier. Arvado is a subsidiary of a German company in the sort of outsourcing and business process outsourcing and IT outsourcing services. So they really built this tool for their own use initially, and then they started to sell it through resellers to others. One of their resellers, in fact, is Beta Systems, and they offer the Arvado tool in addition to their Beta 92 product. So we gave Arvado Systems best multi-tenant SaaS solution because they really built this product from the ground up to be a multi-tenant solution for their own environment where they service a lot of clients. As a result, it has very strong capabilities in that area. It's a distributed systems full scheduler, but we really wanted to call out this characteristic. Another of those is ASCI's Active Batch, where they've recently radically enhanced the managed file transfer capabilities. And so we gave them the award of Best Native Managed File Transfer. Now, many of the tools have added native file transfer, but ASCI did some really interesting things here, and we thought that deserved special recognition. Looking further on the list, BMC Control-M, we felt it was appropriate to call out their DevOps support, and we gave them the award of Best DevOps Support. They really got behind this idea of jobs as code and have really taken that to a high level to really bring the developers into the mix, and that's working out very well for a lot of organizations. With the Atomic product that was recently acquired by CA, we really felt that it was appropriate to call out their cloud native automation. So they've done a lot with supporting workloads in clouds and how they interact with those, and it was above and beyond. So we felt that was appropriate to call out. I already mentioned as we looked at Digitate that from our perspective, it was the first use of machine learning in WLA analytics, and that was really worth mentioning. And finally, with the product, with Infinite Data and their Schedule In product, we gave them the award of Vendor to Watch. They're the newest, youngest product in this space, very modern architecture, and they have a really fast startup, ease of use. We felt that was something to call out as well. So you'll see if you decide to come download the report, we go into greater detail on all of these. So finally, I wanted to talk about some of the future trends as we kind of look forward with this market. Now, some of these were on my list last time as well, and they continue to impact the marketplace. So I expect that we're going to see continued development in the area of these full web services APIs, and really allowing scheduling to be more embedded natively within the application. Another area is monitoring and control of release processes. So there are specific release automation tools, but we're seeing as DevOps is being more rolled in, we're seeing more use of these tools, more integration into the release processes. User communities and user community awareness. The more that you can build your own interfaces and utilize the web services type APIs, the more you have a need for a community to share among end users what has been done by others and really sort of move the bar as a community. And many of the tools have added these capabilities. And more, I think, as the ability to create your own interfaces and utilize these APIs, as they get more powerful, there's an increasing need to work with others, learn from others, see what they're doing, share what you're doing, and so forth. Agent and change management is another area where we're seeing, there's been a lot of improvement recently, but there's room for more, and a lot of the vendors are focused more and more on how to manage agents, allow multiple versions of agents to coexist, and just the whole process of change management around the agents is an area that we see future improvements coming. The whole idea of data awareness, so beyond just the managed file transfer capabilities, but even light data manipulation or event processing, not just based on the arrival of a file, but the contents of the file. So there's a lot more happening around looking more into the data itself and behaving differently based on the data. This trend for self-service and bringing business stakeholders involvement into the process, I think that's going to continue. The largest area, though, I think is the machine learning, the AI, cognitive computing. I think we're going to see an increasing amount of this being incorporated into the tool and making the tools much better. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Raleigh, and we'll take some of your questions. The report in summary form and the full report is available on our website. The link is here for those who want to come and purchase the report. But Raleigh, I'll let you run the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Yes, the follow-up email will include a direct link if you want to get more information about the report. We have time for a couple of questions. The first one, Dan, is can you provide any insight about Cisco, specifically what category they would fit in?
Well, the Cisco no longer owns the product. I need to be clear about that. If you're referring to the title product, which is now independent of Cisco, it's an enterprise class tool, and Title was a pretty big name in the space before Cisco acquired them. I think in about the 2009 timeframe, if I remember correctly. And there, I interviewed a number of large enterprise clients that are using that tool. So it's a very full-featured product with, and in our 2015 report, we had given a special award to that tool for its fault tolerance. So that's one standout characteristic about the Title product. But it's capable of very large environments, and a lot of very large enterprise clients use that tool.
Thank you, Dan. Let's take one more question. If we were unable to answer your questions during this event, I will go ahead and send them on to Dan. The final question is, I'm about to start the process of evaluating new WLA software for my company. Can EMA help with that process?
Yes, we can. So, one way to gain some assistance in that is that you can purchase the full report, and there's a full 4 to 5 page profile on each of the 14 products that are full scheduler products, and then there's additional information about those enrichment products in that report as well. So you could certainly start with that, and my intention with this whole radar process is that it really jump-starts the RFI process, if you will. You can sort of skip that and narrow your search down to 2, 3, 4 products that you then are going to need to go into more analysis with, maybe proof of concept. But you can more quickly get down to your short list. And the report will help you do that. Additionally, the entire model that's used for this process, the weighting can be fine-tuned to an organization's specific needs. So that's something that we don't make publicly available through our library, but you can engage us to work with you to understand your specific needs, fine-tune the weighting in the model, and that radar chart will actually come out specific for you. And we can do that on a working together one-to-one basis. So if that's something that would be of interest to you, you can reach out to us, and we can engage you on that front, and walk you through sort of a requirements definition process, or you may already know specifically what is high priority for you. We can then adjust the weighting model accordingly to your priorities, and we will get a custom answer out of that model specific to you, and that's maybe a more targeted way to fine-tune your search process and your acquisition process for a new tool.
Great. Thank you for that insight, Dan. And I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. I do hope that you will check out the follow-up email that you will receive later today. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope to see you at a future event.